Something happened quietly, without a press conference, without a headline on the front page of every newspaper, without a single senator standing at a podium warning the American people. It happened in the background, the way most things that matter happen. And if you hold physical gold or silver right now, bars, coins, rounds, anything, you need to hear what I'm about to tell you. Because your privacy window may be closing faster than anyone in the mainstream financial media is willing to admit. I want you to think about something for a second. Think about why you bought physical metal in the first place. It wasn't just because you liked the way it looked. It was because somewhere, deep in your gut, you understood that physical metal operates outside the system. You can't hack it, you can't freeze it, you can't inflate it away. And critically, up until very recently, you could hold it with a degree of privacy that no digital asset, no brokerage account, no bank account could offer you. That was the whole point. That was the promise. And right now, that promise is being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by a government that is more desperate than it has ever been in modern history to know exactly what you own, where it is, and how much it's worth. Now, I know some of you are rolling your eyes. You've heard the doom and gloom before. You've been told the sky is falling 100 times. But I want to be very precise with you today, because this is not about fear mongering. This is about documenting a specific, verifiable shift in the regulatory landscape around physical precious metals. A shift that every single person watching this video needs to understand if you want to protect what you've worked your whole life to build. Let's start with the foundation, because I think a lot of people fundamentally misunderstand where the risk actually lives when it comes to precious metals and privacy. The threat is not that some government agent is going to knock on your door and demand you hand over your gold. That's not how it works. Not today, anyway. The threat is something far more subtle and, in many ways, far more dangerous. It's the gradual construction of a financial surveillance infrastructure so comprehensive, so deeply embedded in the everyday machinery of commerce, that physical metal ownership becomes, over time, no different from a bank deposit in terms of government visibility. That's what we're watching unfold in slow motion right now. Here's what changed. The IRS has been quietly tightening its grip around precious metals dealers, the people you buy from and sell to. Now, Form 8300 has been around for a long time. Most people in the metals community know about it. It requires dealers to report cash transactions above a certain threshold. Fine, that's been the rule. But here's what most retail investors don't realize. The definition of what counts as cash under those reporting rules has been expanding. Structured wire transfers, certain combinations of payment instruments, patterns of behavior that regulators deem suspicious, all of it is increasingly being swept into the reporting net. And the dealers themselves are under enormous pressure to comply because the penalties for failing to report are severe. But the 1099-B situation is where things get really interesting and really concerning. Most people believe that the reporting requirements for selling physical metals are either very high thresholds or essentially non-existent for small retail quantities. And historically, that has largely been true. Only specific forms and quantities, think 100-ounce gold bars, thousands of ounces of silver in specific formats, triggered mandatory reporting. Your common 1-ounce gold eagles, your silver rounds, your 10-ounce bars, below the threshold, not reportable. That was the old understanding. But here's the thing about regulatory thresholds. They are not permanent. They are not etched in stone. They are adjusted, clarified, reinterpreted, and quietly expanded by the agencies that administer them, often without any congressional vote, often without any public debate. And the direction of travel, without exception, has been toward more disclosure, more reporting, more visibility, never less. Think about what has happened to financial privacy across every other sector over the last 20 years. Bank Secrecy Act requirements have been expanded repeatedly. Anti-money laundering thresholds have been restructured. The FinCEN Beneficial Ownership Registry now requires small business owners to disclose who actually controls their companies, a massive invasion of privacy that was buried in a piece of infrastructure legislation and implemented with almost no public awareness. The question isn't whether that same pattern will come for physical metals. The question is how far along the process already is. And the answer, when you dig into it, is much further than most people realize. Now I want to talk about something that should set off alarm bells for every silver investor in the audience, because what happened to silver recently is unprecedented in modern American history. Silver was officially classified as a critical national security mineral. Let that sink in for a moment. A mineral that you may currently be holding in your home safe, in a stack under your bed, in a storage facility. That mineral has been designated by the federal government as essential to national security. And here is the critical implication that most coverage of this story completely missed. When something is classified as a national security resource, the legal framework governing it changes. The government's authority to regulate it, restrict it, control its movement and pricing, and ultimately to know where all of it is located, that authority expands dramatically under national security designations. This is not a theoretical concern. This is constitutional and statutory law. The same mechanisms that allow the government to control the export of certain technologies, the same frameworks that allow the government to intervene in critical supply chains, those same frameworks now legally apply to silver, and nobody is talking about it. Before we go further, if you're watching this and you have real retirement savings at stake, I put together a free guide in the description that breaks down the saving secrets that thousands of American retirees are quietly using to protect their hard-earned wealth from exactly the kind of systemic risks we're talking about today. It's completely free, it's in the description below, and it covers the strategies that the wealthy have been using for decades that most ordinary Americans simply never hear about. Check it out, it's there for you. Now, let me take you back to 1933, because history has a way of rhyming in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. And I think this historical parallel is one that every physical metal holder needs to sit with. April 1933. The United States is in the grip of the Great Depression. Banks are failing by the hundreds. Unemployment has reached levels that are almost unimaginable by modern standards. And President Roosevelt, by executive order, mandates that private citizens surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve at a fixed price set by the government, not by the market. People who had been prudent, people who had saved, people who had opted out of the fractional reserve banking system that had just spectacularly imploded, those people were compelled to hand over their gold or face criminal prosecution. 10 years in prison and a fine of $10,000, which in 1933 money was an almost incomprehensible amount. That was the penalty for holding what had been, just days before, completely legal private property. Now, here's what most people get wrong when they discuss that history. They say, well, that was a different time. That was an emergency. It couldn't happen today. And I want to challenge that narrative directly. The emergency conditions that led to Executive Order 6102, a collapsing banking system, a currency under existential pressure, a government desperate to consolidate control over monetary reserves. How different really are those conditions from where we find ourselves today? The national debt has reached levels that would have been considered science fiction just a decade ago. The dollar's share of global reserve holdings is in a structural, long-term decline. Central banks around the world, China, Russia, India, Turkey, dozens more, have been accumulating gold at the fastest pace in recorded history, specifically because they are preparing for a world in which the dollar is no longer the uncontested reserve currency. What do you think those central banks know that the average American retiree doesn't? And here's the piece of this story that connects directly to the privacy question. In 1933, the government was able to enforce Executive Order 6102 because gold was a registered, known quantity. Banks knew who had safe deposit boxes. Dealers knew who had bought metal. The paper trail, incomplete as it was by modern standards, was sufficient for enforcement. The lesson that every government planning apparatus has taken from that history is simple. If you want to maintain the option to act decisively on precious metals in a future crisis, you need to know where those metals are. You need a complete, comprehensive record of who holds what. And the incremental tightening of reporting requirements we are seeing today, the expansion of dealer obligations, the redefinition of reporting thresholds, the integration of precious metals transactions into anti-money laundering frameworks, all of it is building exactly that inventory, slowly, methodically, quietly. Let me tell you about something else that is happening in parallel, because you cannot understand the precious metals privacy story without understanding the CBDC story, and those two things are moving on converging tracks. Central bank digital currencies are not a distant future scenario anymore. Multiple major economies have either launched them or have them in advanced pilot programs. And the fundamental property of a CBDC, the thing that makes it categorically different from cash, different from traditional bank deposits, different from anything that has existed before in monetary history, is that every single transaction is visible to the issuing authority. Every purchase, every sale, every transfer. The government doesn't need to audit you. It doesn't need to request your records. It simply has them, all of them, in real time. Now think about how physical precious metals fit into that world. If every transaction flows through a CBDC system where nothing is private, then physical metal, metal that changes hands without digital footprint, metal that stores value outside the digital grid, becomes not just a financial instrument, but something closer to a statement of dissent. And historically, governments have not looked kindly on tools of financial dissent during periods of economic stress. The regulatory pressure on physical metals is not happening in isolation. It is happening specifically as the architecture of total financial surveillance is being constructed around it. The noose, to be blunt, is tightening. And here's where I want to spend a moment on the geopolitical dimension, because it adds another layer of urgency that a lot of mainstream analysts are still refusing to acknowledge. The de-dollarization movement is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented, observable, measurable phenomenon. BRICS nations have been building parallel payment systems, bilateral currency agreements, and commodity pricing mechanisms that deliberately bypass the dollar-denominated financial infrastructure. This is not happening because these countries dislike America philosophically. It's happening because they understand that dollar dominance gives the United States an extraordinary amount of coercive power, the ability to cut countries off from the global financial system through sanctions, the ability to control trade flows through control of the reserve currency, and they want out from under that leverage. Gold is the centerpiece of every serious alternative monetary system that is being discussed at the highest levels of global finance. It is not a coincidence that the countries most aggressively accumulating physical gold are the same countries most aggressively building alternatives to the dollar system. What does that mean for you, sitting at home with your stack? It means that the metal you hold is increasingly valuable, not just as an inflation hedge, but as a geopolitical asset, something that holds its value across monetary systems, something that doesn't rely on the solvency or the good faith of any particular government. And it means that the pressures on Western governments to reassert control over private gold and silver holdings are going to increase, not decrease, as the dollar's position in the global monetary order continues to erode. Now, here's the part of this conversation that matters most practically, especially if you are a retiree or approaching retirement and you have significant savings that you've spent decades accumulating. The single most important question in this environment is not whether to hold gold and silver. That question, frankly, has already been answered by history and by the trajectory of events we've just walked through. The question is how you hold it, the structure, the vehicle, the legal framework that surrounds your precious metals holdings. Because structure matters enormously when the regulatory environment is shifting, and the wrong structure can leave you exposed in ways that you don't fully understand until it's too late. A properly structured gold IRA is one of the most powerful tools available to American retirees right now. Not just because it gives you exposure to physical precious metals, but because it does so within a legal framework that carries significant protections, that allows you to grow your wealth on a tax-advantaged basis, and that gives you real, tangible physical metal. Not a paper promise, not an ETF, not a derivative, sitting in a compliant, insured depository. If you have retirement savings sitting in accounts that are fully exposed to a stock market that is priced for perfection in an economy that is anything but, if you have money in a 401k or an IRA that is 100% allocated to assets denominated in a currency that is losing its global reserve status, I genuinely encourage you to look seriously at whether a partial allocation to a gold IRA makes sense for your situation. The world is sending very clear signals right now. Market collapses, geopolitical realignments, currency crises, inflation pressures that are structural rather than cyclical, all of it is pointing toward the same conclusion that central banks globally reached years ago. Physical gold belongs in a serious long-term wealth preservation strategy. And for American retirees specifically, the gold IRA vehicle is the most tax-efficient, most legally sound way to get there. Let me also address the digital asset dimension briefly, because some of you are thinking, well, what about crypto? Isn't that also outside the system? And the answer, bluntly, is no. Crypto has been systematically brought inside the regulatory perimeter over the last several years. The IRS now requires comprehensive reporting of digital asset transactions. Exchanges operate under Know Your Customer requirements that are more stringent than those applied to precious metals dealers. The blockchain, which crypto enthusiasts celebrated for its transparency, turns out to be the world's most comprehensive financial surveillance tool. Every transaction permanently and publicly recorded, available for forensic analysis by any government agency with the tools to interrogate it. Bitcoin and Ethereum are not outside the system. They are, in fact, among the most surveilled assets in existence. Physical gold and silver, despite the pressures we've discussed today, still represent a degree of financial privacy that simply does not exist anywhere in the digital asset world. But that advantage is being actively eroded, and the time to understand that and act accordingly is now, not after the regulatory window closes further. So where does all of this leave us? We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the expanding reporting requirements around dealer transactions, the reclassification of silver as a national security mineral, the historical precedent of gold confiscation and the conditions that made it possible, the parallel construction of CBDC infrastructure designed to eliminate financial privacy altogether, and the geopolitical forces driving gold demand to levels we haven't seen in generations. All of these threads are connected. All of them are pointing in the same direction. And all of them underscore the same core truth that I think anyone who is serious about protecting their wealth needs to internalize. The window for financial privacy, the window for holding assets outside the visibility of an increasingly surveillance-oriented financial system, is narrowing. It is not closed, but the trajectory is clear. The people who understand this are moving. The central banks understand this. They've been acting on it for years. The sophisticated institutional money understands this. The governments of the major emerging economies understand this. What I want is for the American retiree, the person who worked 40 years, who saved faithfully, who did everything right, to understand it too, before the opportunity to position accordingly has passed. If you watched this all the way to the end, I have something special for you. Check the description below. There's a free guide outlining the savings secrets that thousands of American retirees are already using to protect their wealth in exactly the environment we've been discussing. And if you have over $100,000 in any retirement account and you want to go deeper, if you want a real one-on-one, no-obligation educational web conference with someone who can walk you through exactly how to structure your precious metals holdings for maximum protection in the current environment, mention that you watched to the end when you reach out through the description link. That offer is available exclusively to American retirees with qualifying retirement savings, and it won't be available forever. The time to act on this information is not when the next crisis is already underway. It's now, while you still have the clarity and the options to make deliberate choices about your financial future. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay informed, and protect what you've built.